That morning at the Bank of America branch on the Upper East Side began like any other day. The lobby clean and quiet, familiar footsteps coming and going in the precise rhythm of a place that did not tolerate anything out of tune. When Lillian Carter stepped through the automatic glass doors, no one immediately turned to look at her, but just a few seconds later, the difference began to register. She wore an old but neat gray maid's uniform, her curly hair tied back neatly, and low-heeled shoes worn down at the heels from years of walking. Lillian walked straight to the teller counter, waited in line properly without pushing or hesitating. When it was her turn, she looked at the teller and said clearly, "I want to check the balance on my account." The teller paused briefly, glanced up at her, then asked again, "Excuse me, ma'am, you said check the balance?" "Yes," Lillian replied, her voice even, without adding anything. The teller looked at the screen in front of her, then back at Lillian, her gaze lingering longer than necessary. "Do you have any identification?" she asked. Lillian took an old wallet from her cloth bag, pulled out her bank card and ID, and placed them on the counter. The teller picked up the card, glanced at it, then turned her head toward the manager. Daniel Whitford was standing nearby, having just finished a conversation with two well-dressed customers. When he caught his employee's eye, he walked over. "What's the issue?" Daniel asked. "She wants to check her balance," the teller replied, lowering her voice. Daniel looked Lillian up and down without rushing, then smiled. "Ma'am," he said, "are you sure you've come to the right branch?" Lillian looked him straight in the eye. "I've come to check my account," she replied. Daniel nodded, still smiling. "I understand, but this branch primarily serves priority accounts. You might be better assisted at another branch. This is the branch where I opened my account," Lillian said, her voice unchanged. Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. "You opened an account here?" he repeated, as if needing further confirmation. "Yes." Daniel turned to the teller. "Please check the information again for me." Then he turned back to Lillian. "What do you do for a living?" The question was asked lightly, almost conversationally. "I'm a domestic worker," Lillian answered. Daniel nodded slightly. "Domestic worker," he repeated, then continued. "You understand, we have a duty to be cautious with transactions that don't match the customer's profile." A man standing nearby let out a soft snort, while a woman behind leaned in to whisper something to her companion. Lillian did not turn around. "I just need to see the balance," she said. Daniel pressed his lips together, then said, "All right, please wait a moment. We need to verify further." "How long?" Lillian asked. Daniel glanced at his watch. "Not long," he replied, then turned to the teller. "Note down her information." The teller typed a few lines on the computer. Daniel pointed toward the row of seats near the restroom area. "You can wait over there." Lillian took back her wallet and documents, nodded once, then walked in the direction he indicated. Without asking more, without slowing down, no apology was offered, nor was there any confirmation that her request was still being processed. As Lillian left the counter, Daniel had already turned away, resuming his interrupted conversation with the two earlier customers, his polite smile returning to his face, as if the woman who had just stood before him had never existed. In the bank lobby, a few glances followed Lillian for a brief moment before quickly turning away. No one spoke up. No one asked questions. Lillian stopped by the row of seats, paused for a beat, lightly gripped the strap of her cloth bag, then sat down on the hard plastic chair against the wall near the restroom entrance, where the faint smell of cleaning chemicals lingered and was completely separated from the main transaction area. She placed her cloth bag at her feet, clasped her hands on her knees, kept her back straight, and gazed toward the teller counter, where everything continued normally. The wall clock read 9:18. 5 minutes passed, then 10. A man in a white polo shirt walked in, stood behind her, and was called to the counter in less than a minute. Daniel smiled at him, shook his hand, and made a few polite small-talk remarks. A middle-aged woman with a designer handbag appeared right after and was also served almost immediately. Lillian remained seated, No one looked in her direction, except for a few fleeting glances that quickly averted, as if fearing that lingering would draw them into something uncomfortable. Daniel passed by the waiting area, without looking at her, just glancing at his watch before continuing his work. 20 minutes. 30 minutes. The waiting came without explanation or apology. It existed silently but heavily, as a way of reminding her that her time held no value. A young teller stepped out, holding a coffee cup, laughing and chatting with a colleague. The laughter rang out briefly, then stopped when they noticed Lillian sitting nearby. No one said anything more. Calvin Brooks, the security guard standing near the main door, had seen everything from the start. He was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, solidly built, wearing a dark blue security uniform. Calvin was accustomed to situations like this, accustomed to who got served first, and who was asked to wait just a bit longer. He saw Daniel direct Lillian to the seats near the restroom, saw later arrivals being called to the counter, saw his colleagues' evasive glances. He clenched his fist lightly, then released it. His shift still had 4 hours left. 2 kids in high school, a mortgage not yet paid off. Calvin did not step forward, did not speak. He just stood there observing, like someone who had grown too used to silence as a means of survival. Lillian did not know Calvin was watching her, or if she did not turn around. While waiting, her mind drifted to the familiar mornings of the past 30-plus years. The alarm ringing at 4:30, the dark kitchen coffee brewed in a hurry, shoes put on before dawn, the large Manhattan homes where she mopped floors, washed bed linens, cleaned things that never belonged to her, the families who called her by name, or sometimes just hey, the parties she served but never sat down at, the years when no one asked if she was tired, only if the work was done. Lillian was used to waiting for the bus, for paychecks, for a rare day off. She had learned to be silent, to work, then go home, without complaining, without explaining. But she had never imagined that sitting and waiting to see her own money could drag on like this. The clock read 9:57. Daniel Whitford passed by again, this time stopping to talk with a regular customer. He laughed loudly, patted the man's shoulder. Lillian looked down at her shoes, the toes worn smooth. She adjusted the strap of her cloth bag, took a slow breath, then lifted her head, her gaze still calm. The waiting continued, without drama, without noise, but each passing minute eroded something intangible, as if this very silence was the bank's way of reminding her that there were places where, even if she entered legally, she was still seen as an outsider. After nearly 40 minutes, Daniel Whitford called Lillian Carter's name, not loudly but clearly enough for the entire waiting area to hear. And instead of inviting her to the main teller counter, he pointed toward a side counter in the corner of the lobby, with no signage or decorative plants, just a bare desk and a low chair placed opposite. Lillian stood up, picked up her cloth bag, and walked in the direction he indicated. Her steps slow but without hesitation. Daniel did not invite her to sit. He just gestured briefly and stood behind the desk himself, maintaining just enough distance to create a sense of control. His tone changed from the very first sentence. No more polite smile, no more polished courtesy. You said you wanted to check your account balance, he stated, not as a question. Lillian nodded. Daniel glanced at Melissa Grant, the teller standing beside him, then gave a slight nod. Melissa opened a notepad, held her pen, her eyes fixed on Lillian. Full name? Daniel asked. Lillian answered. Current occupation? He continued, his voice flat and cold. I'm a domestic worker, Lillian said. Daniel looked up slightly, not surprised, just confirming what he had assumed. Monthly income? Lillian gave the figure, without further explanation. Melissa took notes. The sound of the pen scratching paper was clear in the quiet space. Daniel looked at the screen in front of him, typed a few keys, then paused. When was this account opened? He asked. 15 years ago, Lillian replied. Who opened it? I did. Daniel raised his eyebrow very slightly, then continued. What is the primary source of funds in the account? The question sounded administrative, but the way he emphasized each word made it feel like an interrogation. Wages from work, Lillian answered. Only wages. And savings. Daniel looked at Melissa, then back at Lillian. Do you invest? Real estate? Inheritance? No. So why does an account like this exist at this branch? Daniel asked, no longer hiding the suspicion in his voice. I opened it here, Lillian said, still calm. The records show the balance is not consistent with the occupational information, Daniel said, pausing long enough for the statement to carry extra weight. Can you explain that? Lillian looked him straight in the eye. I work and save, she said. No story, no justification. Daniel leaned back against the chair, arms crossed, his gaze scrutinizing. Do you receive large cash deposits? No. Does anyone transfer money to you from out of state? No. Have you ever been investigated financially, or involved in any illegal activity? The question caused a few nearby customers to look up. Melissa paused her pen for a second, then continued writing. Lillian shook her head. No, Daniel nodded, but showed no sign of satisfaction. You understand, he said, his tone sounding explanatory but actually a warning. We have a responsibility to ensure all activity is transparent. Unusual accounts require closer review. Lillian did not react. She stood still, hands placed in front of her, eyes not averting. The silence lasted a few seconds, enough to make the atmosphere in the lobby tense. Calvin Brooks, from his position near the door, glanced over, clearly sensing the shift in Daniel's tone, the way Melissa was taking notes, the way the questions were going far beyond a routine balance inquiry. He took half a step forward, then stopped. Daniel asked a few more questions, circling the same topic, each one framed as procedure, but implying that Lillian's presence here was a problem needing explanation. Lillian answered all of them, concisely, without raising her voice, without defending her dignity. She did not talk about the years of working without rest, did not mention the evenings counting loose change, did not speak of the things she had denied herself. Daniel finally stopped, glanced quickly at Melissa, then back at the screen, as if her answers were sufficient for him to make a decision. Please wait a little longer, he said, his voice firm, not a suggestion but an administrative command. Lillian nodded, turned away, and returned to the waiting area, walking slowly amid glances that deliberately avoided her, while the tension still hung in the bank air, not loud but evident, like something left unsaid. Just a few minutes later, as Lillian had barely sat down, Daniel Whitford's voice rang out again, this time louder, sharper, enough to cut through the keyboard taps and draw the attention of the entire lobby. Mrs. Carter, he called, no longer maintaining polite distance. I need you to come back here. Lillian stood up, clearly sensing the change in the surrounding gazes, no longer quick evasive glances, but naked curiosity directed straight at her. Daniel did not take her back to the side counter as before. Instead, he stood right in the main walkway, where every customer had to pass, turning this call into an event impossible to ignore. He held a stack of papers in his hand, not looking at them right away, but staring straight at Lillian, from head to toe, his gaze pausing for a beat on her maid's uniform. I'm reviewing your file, he said, his voice loud enough, and I have to admit I'm finding it quite puzzling. A few people stopped. An older man in an expensive suit, waiting his turn, turned fully around. Daniel continued, without lowering his voice. A full-time domestic worker, he emphasized each word, having an account at this branch, with a balance that isn't typically seen in profiles like that. He gave a slight smile, not a pleasant one, but like an entertaining observation. The man in the suit let out a hoarse laugh in response. Maybe you cleaned the wrong house, he said, half joking, half serious, enough to draw a few small laughs around him. No one spoke up in protest. Melissa Grant behind the counter bowed her head, pretending to check the computer. Another employee turned away, pretending to be busy. Daniel tilted his head, as if weighing something, then continued, We just want to ensure the bank isn't being taken advantage of. You understand, some people aren't familiar with complex financial procedures. The statement sounded like an explanation, but his gaze toward Lillian's uniform said something else. Lillian stood still, hands lightly gripping her cloth bag strap, without reacting. Her silence did not make Daniel stop. On the contrary, it gave him the feeling of complete control. "Are you sure you fully understand your account?" he asked, this time turning toward the nearby customers, as if inviting them to join in. "Or is someone managing it for you behind the scenes?" The suited man shook his head, laughing. "These days there are so many scams," he said. "If you're not careful, you lose everything." A young woman standing nearby pressed her lips together, looked at Lillian then at Daniel, but said nothing. Calvin Brooks from the main door had taken another step, his heart beating faster, but his feet remained still. Daniel cleared his throat. "While we verify further," he said, "you'll have to wait, and I advise you to prepare yourself for the possibility that there are funds that can't be explained." The statement landed in the bank lobby like a half-accusation. Another laugh rang out, followed by a few whispers. Lillian clearly felt the shift in the air, felt that she was no longer just a suspected customer, but had become brief entertainment for those around her. She lifted her head, looked Daniel straight in the eye. "I just want to see the balance," she said, her voice steady, not loud, but clear. Daniel shrugged. "And we're just doing our job," he replied, turning to Melissa. "Make a note," he said, then looked at Lillian one more time, as if to affirm who held the power. No one in the lobby spoke up in her defense. No one said those questions had gone too far. No one reminded Daniel that he was standing in front of a human being, not a file. Lillian turned away, returned to the waiting area, walking slowly amid curious glances and smiles that hadn't quite faded, and in that very moment, the humiliation was complete without needing another word. Her dignity was not torn apart by harsh words but eroded publicly, by each glance, each silence, each stray laugh that rang out, then died away. When Lillian sat down, no one followed, no reminder, no further instructions, just an intentional void left behind, as if her presence had fulfilled its brief role. Daniel Whitford had already turned away, returning to the main teller counter, his voice immediately lowering as he spoke to another customer, his professional smile returning so quickly that what had just happened seemed like a minor glitch in the bank's smooth morning. Melissa Grant bowed her head close to the screen, typing steadily, not glancing toward the waiting area again. The other employees moved through the lobby at their usual pace, instinctively avoiding eye contact with Lillian, as if even visual acknowledgement might draw them into a situation they didn't want to face. Lillian sat back down on the chair near the restroom, placed her cloth bag close to her feet, hands on her lap, back straight. No one told her how long to wait. No one confirmed they were still processing her request. Time passed without her name being called. A young customer walked in, laughing on the phone, and was called to the counter in just a few minutes. An older couple completed their transaction and left without glancing toward the corner of the lobby. The silence began to take shape. It was not loud, not oppressive in an obvious way, but it enveloped, thickening with each minute. Lillian felt herself placed outside every flow of movement in this room, like an unrelated object, not needing explanation, not needing acknowledgement. Calvin Brooks still stood in his original position, his eyes occasionally glancing toward her then away, as if each additional look forced him to question which side he was on. An employee carrying papers passed Lillian, slowed for a beat, then sped up, without greeting, without apologizing. There were no more questions, no more sarcasm. The interaction had completely ended, and that was the heaviest part. Lillian was no longer an object of suspicion, no longer a temporary joke. She had become a void, something not needing immediate handling, or perhaps not needing handling at all. In that silence, she recognized the familiar feeling that had followed her through years of domestic work, the feeling of being looked through, seen as part of the furniture in someone else's room. The evenings standing aside in the kitchen, waiting for the homeowners to finish eating so she could clean. The crowded parties where no one remembered her name. The times overhearing people discuss money right in front of her, as if she lacked the standing to understand or join in. But here in this bank lobby, the exclusion took a different form, colder, more official, wrapped in the language of procedure and order. The wall clock kept ticking. Each passing minute brought no hope of being called, only reinforcing a wordless message that her waiting was no one's priority. A few customers glanced her way, their eyes fleeting, then turning away, not out of malice but because they had learned not to intervene in things that made them uncomfortable. Their collective silence became a form of invisible complicity, where no one needed to speak for the exclusion to proceed fully. Lillian did not move, did not shift position, did not show fatigue. She did not take out her phone, did not check the clock, did not sigh. Her self-control was not a declaration, but a habit forged over years, a way of existing that had helped her navigate many unwelcoming spaces. When Daniel passed the waiting area again without looking her way, Lillian understood that this silence was not oversight or delay but a decision already made. Without words of dismissal, without a clearer gesture, just being forgotten long enough was sufficient for a person to understand they did not belong here. The bank lobby continued operating smoothly around her, transactions proceeding on schedule, soft laughter rising then fading, and in that flow, Lillian Carter sat still, completely separated. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because no one saw the need to acknowledge her presence. It was precisely during that time of being left like that, when no one was paying attention anymore, that Lillian's mind began to drift back to the years that had never appeared in any records or figures, the years that had quietly shaped who she was, and the money now sitting silently in that account. She remembered those evenings in Brooklyn decades ago, when she was younger, babysitting for other families to earn extra money to send home to her mother. The children from all kinds of backgrounds falling asleep on her shoulder, when their parents came home late, while she was the one who stayed last to clean up, put away toys, and wipe spilled milk off the floor. She remembered the elderly people she had cared for, the small quiet apartments where she changed bandages, cooked porridge, and sat for hours listening to them repeat the same stories, because no one else would. There were those who held her hand in their final days, mistaking her for their daughter or son, and Lillian didn't correct them, she just held tighter, staying until the room went completely still. She wasn't named in their wills, didn't appear in any public thanks, she only received a final paycheck envelope, and a nod from the relatives who arrived later. Lillian also remembered the evenings at the community church, where she brought bags of groceries for black families newly arrived in the city, people struggling to find jobs, homes, a place in a city that wasn't easy. She lent them money when she could, no paperwork, no interest, just a promise that when they were better off, they'd help someone else. Once she helped a young woman pay her first month's rent to avoid eviction, then quietly worked extra hours for the next 6 months to make up for what she'd given away. No one called it charity, no one recorded it. That was just how Lillian had lived, day by day, working, saving, sharing, then working some more. The money in her account hadn't come from sudden luck, or some glamorous turning point, but from mornings when she got up earlier than others, evenings when she came home later, times she skipped buying things for herself to tuck away a few dozen dollars into the account. Each deposit was the result of a small decision, repeated over years, with no witnesses, no applause. Lillian had never told anyone she did it out of morals or principles, she just knew that if she could help, she should, and if she could save, she should, because life made no firm promises to people like her. In the bank lobby right now, where she was being treated like a question mark, no one knew that the woman sitting quietly there had once been a pillar for so many others, had used these very hands to hold on to life, to provide a bit of security for those who had no one. No one knew that the money they were doubting had been built from kindness. No one saw, unadvertised, not traded for status or respect, and Lillian had no intention of saying so. She had never boasted, never used what she'd done to demand special treatment. She believed that right actions didn't need others' recognition to be right. Sitting there in the prolonged silence, Lillian felt no shame or confusion about the origins of her money. If anything wore her down, it was having to face a world that always demanded she explain her worth. While the most important things she'd done her whole life were never recorded on paper, never showed up on screens, and were never accepted as proof of anything, even though those very things were the true foundation for all the figures, now resting in the account under the name Lillian Carter. When Daniel Whitford returned to the waiting area once more, he carried no files or computer screen, just a decision already formed beforehand. His voice, though still outwardly polite, left no room for any further dialogue. "Mrs. Carter," he said, standing far enough away that he didn't have to lower his voice. "We cannot proceed with your request at this time." Lillian looked up at him. "Why?" she asked. Not challengingly, just wanting a clear answer. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "There are issues in your file that require further verification," he said, using the exact sterile language of procedure, "and until that's completed, it would be best if you left the branch. We'll be in touch." No specific timeline, no apology, no commitment. Just a neat conclusion. Lillian stood up, picked up her cloth bag, and said nothing more. She walked past the main teller counter, where Daniel had already turned his back to serve another customer, his familiar smile quickly returning, as if nothing had happened. A few glances followed Lillian as she passed. Not curious anymore, just wary and relieved that the uncomfortable situation had finally been escorted out the door. The glass doors slid open, and the cold New York wind rushed in, cutting through the artificial warmth of the lobby. Lillian stepped onto the sidewalk, paused for a beat to steady herself, then walked to the stone bench against the wall where passers-by often stopped to tie shoes or check phones. She sat down, placed her cloth bag beside her, hands on her lap, shoulders slightly slumped against the chill. Traffic hummed steadily. People hurried by, no one noticing the woman who'd just been asked to leave the bank behind them. Lillian drew in a slow breath, then exhaled, feeling the cold air fill her chest. She didn't cry. Tears didn't come. Or perhaps they'd been held back for far too long. She was used to swallowing feelings like this, used to getting up and carrying on after moments of being dismissed, overlooked, pushed to the margins. But sitting there on the cold stone bench, Lillian couldn't deny that this was the lowest point the morning had brought. Not because of the money she hadn't seen, but because of how it had all unfolded, being asked to leave as if her presence were a risk to be removed. She looked down at her worn-heeled shoes, remembering all the time she'd walked through snow to make it to work on time, all the time she'd stood on porches, waiting for employers to come home and let her in, and realized this feeling wasn't entirely new, just set in a different context, brighter, cleaner, but no less cold. Lillian sat still for a long time, not looking back, not seeking any glances from the bank lobby behind her. As if that place had completely left her world. She accepted this moment the way she'd accepted so many others in her life, with silence, with steady breathing, with refusing to let the insult touch the self-control she'd spent a lifetime building. Amid the rushing crowd of New York, the black woman sitting quietly on the stone bench outside the bank didn't cry, didn't plead, and that very composure formed the quiet emotional low point, where nearly everything had been taken away, but the most important thing, her dignity, remained intact, even if no one around noticed. In that moment, a black sedan slowed at the curb and stopped completely, engine idling steadily in the city's pale cold. At first Lillian didn't notice, until the door opened and a woman stepped out, paused for a few seconds, as if making sure she wasn't mistaken, then called out, not loudly, with the very human hesitation of someone afraid of getting the name wrong. "Lillian." Lillian looked up, squinting slightly against the light reflecting off the bank glass, then recognized Rebecca Sloan. They didn't see each other often, didn't chat on the phone, but it was a face Lillian could never forget. Rebecca wore a long dark wool coat, low heels, carrying a leather briefcase, the look of someone at home in office buildings and punctual appointments. "Rebecca," Lillian said, her voice steady, not overly surprised, as if this meeting were just one coincidence among many in her life. Rebecca stepped closer, her eyes quickly scanning Lillian's face, lingering on the hands in her lap and the cloth bag beside her. "What happened?" she asked. No beating around the bush. Lillian glanced toward the bank doors behind her, then back. "They told me to leave," she said. "That was all." Rebecca didn't press for details right away. She turned to look at the building, her expression shifting quickly from surprise to focus. "You were just in there?" Rebecca asked. Lillian nodded. "I came to check my balance." Rebecca let out a short breath, as if piecing together something she should have anticipated. "I'm on my way to the office," she said, then paused, looking at Lillian again. "They wouldn't let you see it?" "No." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I guess they didn't give a clear reason either." Lillian didn't reply, but her silence was answer enough. Rebecca glanced at her watch, then back at the bank doors. "Do you have time?" she asked. "I'm still waiting," Lillian said. Simple, almost casual. Rebecca's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but a familiar reflex to injustices, wrapped in polite language. "I don't think they'll call you back on their own," she said. "And I don't think they should end it like this." Lillian looked at Rebecca, calm but wary. "You don't have to." Rebecca shook her head. "I know what I'm doing," she said firmly. "And I think it's time they knew too." Rebecca opened the car door, pulled out her briefcase, then closed it carefully. "You still have your documents?" she asked. Lillian nodded, pulled her wallet from the cloth bag, checked quickly. "Good," Rebecca said. "Do you remember who I am?" Lillian nodded again. "The fund's lawyer," she said. Rebecca didn't correct her. "One of them," she replied. "And the one listed in your legal records." Lillian didn't ask more. She was used to the connections in her life, rarely needing verbal explanation. Rebecca straightened up, adjusted her coat collar. "We're going back in," she said. "Not a suggestion, not to make a scene, just to finish what you came here to do." Lillian looked toward the bank doors once more. The glass still slid open and closed, people coming and going, no one noticing the two women outside. "Okay," she said. Rebecca turned and walked ahead, stride quick and decisive, accustomed to entering places that didn't welcome her. Lillian stood, picked up her cloth bag, followed slower pace, but steady. As they approached the doors, Rebecca pushed the glass open, the white lights flooding out again. And in that moment, not because of the cold outside, or the silence just endured, but because of something else that had suddenly become very clear. Lillian Carter was no longer returning to this bank alone. Rebecca Sloan entered the bank lobby first, not rushing, but purposeful. And as soon as the glass doors closed behind them, her presence immediately created a different dynamic from when Lillian had entered alone. Rebecca didn't look around assessing, didn't head to a teller like a regular customer. She went straight to the management area where Daniel Whitford was talking to a staff member. "I need to speak with the branch manager," Rebecca said. Clear voice, not loud, not soft, but firm enough to halt the prior conversation. Daniel turned, his eyes scanning Rebecca, then settling on Lillian behind her. In that instant, his expression shifted quickly, from annoyance to wariness. "I am the manager," Daniel replied. "What can I do for you?" Rebecca extended her hand. "Rebecca Sloan," she said. "Legal representative." Daniel shook reflexively, but at those two words, his hand paused mid-beat. "Representing whom?" Daniel asked. Rebecca leaned slightly to the side, allowing Lillian to step level with her. "Mrs. Lillian Carter," she said. "And the related legal entities." Daniel looked at Lillian, then back to Rebecca. "I'm not sure I understand," he said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Mrs. Carter was just asked to leave the branch due to further verification needed on her file." Rebecca nodded. "I'm aware," she said. "And that's precisely why I'm here." She opened her briefcase, pulled out a neatly organized stack of papers. "Mrs. Carter is the named holder and primary beneficiary of a lawful trust registered in the state of New York, with terms in full compliance with federal regulations," Rebecca said, each sentence clear, unemotional. "Additionally, she is the sole authorized signer on certain accounts at this branch." Daniel frowned. "A trust," he repeated. "I didn't see." "You will," Rebecca interrupted. Not harshly, but decisively. "If you check the correct records." Melissa Grant, standing nearby, looked up from her screen, eyes shifting. Rebecca turned to her. "You were the one taking notes earlier." Melissa nodded. Then you should note that any speculative questions about the legitimacy of these accounts, without specific basis, could be viewed as violations of procedure and customer rights, Rebecca said, then turned back to Daniel. The atmosphere in the lobby shifted noticeably. Small conversations stopped. A few nearby customers began paying attention. Daniel cleared his throat. "We were only following regulations," he said. "When there's a mismatch between occupation and there is no regulation allowing you to speculate on motives or legitimacy based on occupation," Rebecca replied. "And certainly no regulation allowing you to ask a customer to leave the branch without formal notice." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. He turned to the screen, typed quickly, his expression more tense. Melissa leaned down, typing as well. Another employee approached, whispered something to Daniel. He didn't reply immediately. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, though the lobby temperature hadn't changed. Rebecca stood still, hands lightly on her briefcase. No pushing, no raising her voice, but her presence like a weight on the scale. Daniel couldn't ignore. "If you'd like," Rebecca continued, "I can request your bank's legal department join us right now, or we can simply complete Mrs. Carter's original request." Daniel looked up, clear confusion in his eyes. "That's not necessary." "It is very necessary," Rebecca cut in, "because Mrs. Carter was treated improperly in the very branch where she has full transaction rights." Lillian stood quietly beside her, saying nothing. She didn't look at Daniel or the others around, but her silence now wasn't passive. It stood alongside Rebecca's voice, forming a clear counterweight. Daniel turned to Lillian. "Mrs. Carter," he said, voice lower than before, "we only wanted to complete what she came here to do." Rebecca finished for him. Daniel swallowed hard. He glanced around the lobby, where more and more eyes were watching. The familiar order, where he decided who got served first, who waited, was wavering. He nodded briefly. "All right," Daniel said. "Please return to the counter." For the first time that morning, the invitation wasn't a command. It was a concession. Bank staff began moving differently. Faster, more cautiously. Melissa stood, pulled out a chair. Calvin Brooks by the main door, straightened more. And as Lillian followed Rebecca back to the teller counter, no one in the lobby looked at her like someone who needed checking anymore. The balance of power had shifted, not loudly, not announced, just by the truth finally being placed where it belonged. Daniel Whitford logged into the system himself, this time, no longer delegating to Melissa as usual. His movements were slower, overly careful, as if every click might be scrutinized. Rebecca Sloan stood slightly to the side, close enough to see the screen clearly, far enough not to press. Lillian Carter was invited to sit in the chair at the counter, the very spot she should have had from the start. But now it didn't feel like a granted privilege, more like a belated correction. Daniel entered the password. The screen loaded data in unusually long seconds. In that wait, the bank lobby nearly held its breath. Customers nearby didn't leave, even if their transactions were done. Some pretended to check phones, but eyes kept glancing over. Melissa stood beside, hands clasped, no longer taking notes. Calvin Brooks stayed by the door, posture straighter, gaze sharper. Daniel cleared his throat. "We'll access the primary account," he said, not informing, more reassuring himself. On the screen, Lillian Carter's name appeared, along with sub-items for authorizations and associated entities. Daniel paused when he saw the list was longer than expected. Rebecca said nothing, just a very slight nod. Daniel clicked the balance. The screen blanked briefly, then the numbers appeared, clear, no need to zoom. $612,480. $612,480. No effects, no alert sound, just the figures sitting on white background. But they instantly changed the entire lobby atmosphere. No one spoke. A man who'd been joking earlier froze, keys still in hand. The woman in the fur coat parted her lips, then closed them, unsure what she'd just seen. Daniel stared at the screen, then at Rebecca, then at Lillian, and for the first time that morning, his gaze held no judgment, just unhidden confusion. "There may be a mistake," he said quietly. No longer certain, Rebecca leaned toward the screen. "You can double-check," she said. Daniel did, re-entering commands, opening details. Transactions appeared, spanning years. No unusual transfers, no signs of money laundering or risky investments. Just steady deposits, uneven amounts, growing over time. Daniel swallowed. "This money," he said, "where did it come from?" The question much softer now. Rebecca answered for Lillian, tone unchanged. "Part from a community fund Mrs. Carter co-founded," she said. "The fund receives contributions from families and individuals she supported over the years. The fund receives contributions from families and individuals she supported over the years." Daniel frowned. "Supported?" Rebecca nodded. "Child care, elder care. Financial help during hard times. Not business. No profit. Just people paying it forward when they could." Rebecca pointed to the transaction list. "As you can see, no sudden large amounts. No suspicious flows. Just many small ones, accumulating over time." Daniel looked back at the screen. He began to realize what he should have seen from the start. This wasn't an unusual story. It was a story too ordinary for those never seen with fair eyes. A nearby customer couldn't hold back. Murmured "Good Lord," then fell silent, realizing he'd broken the hush. The lobby fell into absolute stillness. No keyboard clicks. No footsteps. Melissa bowed her head lower, face flushed. Daniel leaned on the counter. Deep breath. "I didn't know," he said, unclear to whom. Rebecca looked at him. "That's no reason to raise doubts," she said. Lillian sat straight-backed, hands on lap. She didn't stare at the screen or seek crowd reactions. The numbers didn't surprise her. They just confirmed what she'd long known. Every hour worked. Every act of help. Every choice to put others first had left its mark, even if unrecognized at the time. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carter," he said, voice fully lowered now. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience this morning." The apology sounded weak in the vast space. Rebecca didn't react. Lillian looked up. "I just wanted to check my balance," she said, repeating her very first words, closing the circle. Daniel nodded repeatedly. "Yes, of course." He turned to Melissa. "Print the statement," he said, faster than needed. Melissa complied, hands trembling slightly. The printer started, paper feed loud in the prolonged silence. Eyes in the lobby no longer held judgment or curiosity, just stunned awe. No one laughed. No one whispered. No one found this entertaining anymore. Before them wasn't a shocking sum. It was a truth laid out undeniably. The woman in the domestic uniform wasn't the mismatch in this space. The way they'd viewed her was. The prolonged silence that followed after the bank statement was placed in front of Lillian Carter. Was unlike any pause that had occurred earlier that morning. It was not anticipation, nor tension, but a void where all familiar reflexes had become useless. Those who had mocked, echoed agreements, or viewed her as minor entertainment, no longer knew which facial expression to adopt. The man in the expensive suit cleared his throat softly, as if testing whether he could break the atmosphere, then fell silent again when no one responded. The woman in the fur coat turned away, pretending to read messages, but her hands holding the phone trembled slightly. There were no more whispers, no more exchanged glances. The truth had emerged too clearly, rendering any defensive reaction obvious if voiced. Daniel Whitford stood behind the counter, his hand resting on the cold stone surface, no longer moving. He glanced at the screen one more time, as though hoping the numbers would change if stared at long enough, then slowly looked away, facing the space he had controlled for years through habit and authority. In that moment, Daniel was not just confronting a professional error, but an ethical question that no training course had prepared an answer for. He had treated a human being as a problem simply because she did not fit his image of this place. Rebecca Sloan remained beside him, saying nothing more, because everything that needed to be said had been placed on the screen. Melissa Grant bowed her head, cheeks flushed, realizing that her notes were no longer harmless procedure, but evidence of complicity. Daniel cleared his throat, but this time no explanation was light enough to ease the heaviness spreading through the lobby. He looked at Lillian, then at those around him, as if realizing for the first time that their eyes were waiting for something from him. But no justification was offered. No "we were just following procedure" could sound convincing anymore. That silence was the consequence, and it clung to Daniel in a way that a public reprimand might have been more bearable. From his position near the door, Calvin Brooks took another step toward the counter, this time without pausing. The sound of his shoes echoed clearly on the marble floor, breaking the already excessive quiet. Calvin stood straight, hands placed in front of his abdomen in proper work posture, but his voice when he spoke carried no tone of command. "I've been here from the beginning," he said. Not looking at Daniel but straight ahead. She came to do a simple thing. And she was treated as if she didn't belong here. No one interrupted him. Daniel turned toward him, eyes flashing surprise. But Calvin continued. "I didn't say anything then," he said. Voice steady, "and that was my mistake." The words fell into the bank lobby like a rare admission. Calvin took a breath. "But I think it needs to be said now, because if not, we'll act like this never happened." A few people bowed their heads lower. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it, realizing that any response now would only expose more clearly what he had done. Lillian sat still, not looking at Calvin, not nodding, not thanking him. His speaking up was not to protect her, but to return some responsibility to this space. The bank lobby remained silent, but it was no longer the silence of complicity. It was the silence of people who had just realized which side they had stood on when everything was still easy. Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging, and in that moment the power he was accustomed to holding did not vanish, but lost the invisible shield that had protected it. No one clapped, no one offered words of comfort. Only a spreading sense of shame remained, not loud, not dramatic, but deep enough to make everyone understand that what had just happened could not be erased by an apology or a completed transaction. The silence in the bank lobby did not last indefinitely, but what followed was more formal, colder, and therefore irreversible. Daniel Whitford was the one who broke that quiet, not with an apology or an attempt to salvage his image, but with a phone call made right at the counter. Voice lowered, brief, without much explanation. He requested connection to the regional compliance department, provided the branch code, customer name, and confirmed that a situation requiring internal review had occurred. Rebecca Sloan stood beside him, not intervening, but noting every word Daniel said. In less than 15 minutes, a conference call was initiated right in the lobby, with no closed doors, no private room, and that alone carried meaning, that this was no longer a personal matter. Daniel was required to recount the entire morning's events, from when Lillian Carter entered the bank until the account was opened in front of everyone. He spoke slowly, choosing words carefully, but the truth could not be rearranged to his advantage. The questions from the other end did not focus on the money, but on procedure, conduct, and the basis for decisions made. When Daniel mentioned profile mismatch, the voice on the line interrupted, asking him to specify which policy allowed such assumption. Daniel did not answer immediately. In the lobby, no one pretended to be busy anymore. Melissa Grant stood huddled behind the counter, hands clenched, when her name was mentioned as the one who took notes and assisted the questioning process. She was asked to provide copies of her notes and system operation history. Another employee was named, then another. Decisions that seemed minor that morning were now linked into a clear sequence, leaving no room for ambiguity or emotional justification. After the call, Daniel set the phone down, looking at no one. He was informed that he would be placed on temporary suspension, effective immediately, while the bank conducted a full internal investigation into discriminatory conduct and customer service procedure violations. There was no argument, no outburst. Daniel only nodded, as if he had anticipated this outcome from the moment Rebecca Sloan walked through the glass door. His employee badge was requested back. System access was remotely disabled. A higher-level manager would arrive to take over the branch that day. Melissa was required to remain for work with compliance. Other involved employees were notified that they would participate in the accountability review, not to find a single scapegoat, but to determine how a chain of actions could occur without anyone stopping it. Lillian Carter was not asked to participate in any further discussions. Rebecca confirmed that all necessary transactions were complete and requested an official record of the incident for legal files. The bank lobby gradually resumed its surface operations, but no one could pretend that morning was just a minor glitch. The customers who witnessed the events left in silence, carrying a story they would not easily retell as entertaining anecdote. For the bank, this was no longer a crisis image management situation, but a clear institutional lesson, recorded in writing, procedures, and specific personnel decisions. Training modules would be updated. Internal guidelines would be reviewed. But what could not be included in any document was the collective shame that had spread through that bank lobby, when a system assumed neutral was forced to look directly at how it had operated on unquestioned assumptions. After the formal procedures were initiated, and the bank lobby gradually emptied, new faces began to appear, not noisily, not with grand introductions, but one by one, each carrying a quiet connection to Lillian Carter. A middle-aged black woman entered first, clutching a housing file tightly, eyes scanning the vast space until they stopped on Lillian, then froze as if unable to believe what she saw. "Miss Lillian," she said, voice choking. Lillian turned, nodded slightly. That woman had once been a single mother nearly evicted from her small Bronx apartment over 10 years ago, and Lillian had given her the final deposit money. No paperwork, no repayment date, just saying to keep it so her child had a place to sleep. After her came an elderly man, walking slowly with a cane, a retired electrician whom Lillian had cared for during his wife's final years. He recognized her from afar, and stood still for a moment, as if not wanting to disrupt this moment. A young couple entered together, holding hands, the woman's pregnancy already showing. They had once been poor students whom Lillian babysat for free for months so they could work night shifts and finish their programs. None of them spoke loudly, none recounted their stories as proof, but their presence alone said everything. They stood near Lillian, not crowding, not making her the center of attention, just there the way she had been there for them when no one else was. Brief exchanges arose, nods, shared glances, and gradually the story no longer resided in legal explanations or numbers on a screen, but in relationships that had spanned years. Rebecca Sloan observed from a distance, recognizing what no report could express. Lillian's kindness had created an invisible network, where each person helped went on to help others in their own way. A bank employee nearby whispered to a colleague, not with sarcasm, but genuine surprise, realizing that the woman they had dismissed was not an exception, but a familiar pillar in the community. Calvin Brooks watched the scene with a subdued gaze, understanding that what had happened was not an individual heroic moment, but the result of many small actions repeated over time. The remaining customers in the lobby lingered longer, listening to stories pieced together in fragments, and for the first time that morning, they did not see Lillian as a question to be answered, but as an answer they had overlooked for so long. There was no speech, no official declaration, just a quiet recognition, spreading that this woman's true value had never lain in her account balance, but in the lives touched, the paths altered, and a community slowly realizing that the person they had failed to see was the one who had supported them the most. In the days that followed, the story did not remain confined to the bank lobby, but quietly shifted to another form, less noisy but more enduring. When the community fund named the Lillian Carter Community Trust was formally referenced in legal documents and closed meetings of those who had been involved from the start. There was no grand launch, no large sign bearing her name, just confirmation emails, signatures in the right places, and a structure completed so that what Lillian had done for years could continue without her needing to be everywhere. The trust began offering small scholarships for black students in the area, prioritizing those from difficult circumstances, but persistent enough to pursue education, not life-changing sums overnight, but enough for books, first semester tuition, or to help a family avoid choosing between rent and their child's future. Alongside that were more flexible education support programs, from covering childcare for parents attending evening classes, to connecting students with safe, stable part-time jobs, the very things Lillian had done barehanded for years. Those involved in the trust understood its spirit well. No one was to treat it as charity, and no one was required to express gratitude verbally. Everything was designed so recipients could stand tall, accept help and move forward, just as Lillian had done with them. Meanwhile, Lillian Carter's life changed almost not at all. She still rose early each morning, brewed coffee in her small kitchen, wore her familiar low-heeled shoes, and took the subway to the homes where she had worked for years. She still cleaned, cooked, babysat, and had brief conversations with people who considered her part of their family, though rarely said so. No one saw her buy a new car, or move. There was no sign that the money in her account had altered how she lived. When asked about the trust, Lillian only said it was something that needed doing, then changed the subject. For her, numbers, legal documents, or official titles held less meaning than seeing a child attend school one more year, a mother continue training, or a family stay in their home. The legacy of kindness Lillian left was not in being recognized, but in what she started continuing without her. It lived in the small choices made for others, in new paths opened without anyone owing gratitude to a specific name. And as the Lillian Carter Community Trust gradually became a stable entity, tied to quiet stories of support and opportunity, the woman who created it continued her simple life, as if the most important thing she had ever done was not leaving a legacy in her name, but ensuring kindness could outlast any brief attention the world gave her. One other morning, a few months later, Lillian Carter once again stepped through the glass doors of the Bank of America branch on the Upper East Side. And this time, nothing in her appearance signaled that this moment would be different. She still wore her familiar housekeeper uniform, still carried her old canvas bag, still wore the low-heeled shoes worn down from years of use. But as soon as she entered the lobby, the difference was immediately apparent. Not from her, but from the space around her. The receptionist looked up and straightened. Another employee paused mid-conversation with a customer. Calvin Brooks, still near the main door, nodded to her first, very slightly, but clearly. Then a teller stood, pulled out a chair. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," she said, voice somewhat tense, as if afraid of doing something wrong. Lillian paused for a beat, looked around the bright bank lobby, where every glance, every wall, every counter was familiar, then nodded in return. No smile, no comment, no gesture suggesting she was enjoying the change. She walked to the teller counter, set down her canvas bag, and said exactly what she had said last time. "I need to check my account." This time, there was no hesitation. No one asked if she was at the right branch. No scrutinizing looks from head to toe. Everything proceeded quickly, smoothly, exactly as it should have from the start. While waiting for the screen to load, Lillian gazed into the space ahead, not seeking any of the eyes around her. She needed no apology, no public acknowledgement, no one to recall that morning as a personal lesson. When the statement was printed and placed before her, Lillian only glanced at it, then folded it carefully, as if it were just a paper confirming what she had long known. The teller stood there, waiting for some reaction, perhaps a thank you, a smile, or at least a sign that everything had been forgiven. But Lillian only picked up her canvas bag, turned, and walked toward the door. As she passed, a few employees stood reflexively, not because of orders or new procedures, but because they understood some moments could not be handled by protocol. Lillian opened the door, daylight flooding the lobby, and as she stepped outside, no one called after her. No one clapped. No concluding words were spoken. On the sidewalk, people continued moving, the city operating at its familiar pace, indifferent to individual stories. Lillian paused for a beat, breathed in the cool air, then kept walking, blending into the crowd as she had many times before. Sir isn't tease. There was no sense of triumph, no dramatic closure, only one thing reaffirmed, in the quietest way possible. Her dignity had not been created by the numbers on the screen. nor did it come from others standing to greet her, or using her proper name. It had been there from the beginning, in the way she entered spaces that did not welcome her, in the way she worked without needing to be seen, in the way she helped others without demanding recognition. The account balance only revealed what should never have needed proof, that a person's worth does not increase when recognized, nor decrease when dismissed. And as Lillian Carter left the bank this time, not as someone whose honor had been restored, but as someone who had never lost it, the story closed not with a loud victory, but with the simplest truth. Dignity is not something returned, but something that always exists, even in moments when no one is willing to see it. If you feel this story, and believe that dignity never depends on appearance or account balance, please subscribe to the channel to continue joining stories that touch the deepest human values. See you in the next story, where another quiet act of kindness can change an entire world.